Nice to connect. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm outside. I like being outside. I can hear my children inside, which makes me like being outside more sometimes.
What age are your kids?
7, 4, and 11 months.
Wow, busy so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting, man. I spent so long trying to avoid it.
Yeah. Why was that?
I suppose it's just an old story, isn't it? Immaturity, not being with the right women, or not being, maybe being with the right women, but not being in the right place with the right women, the lack of willingness to accept responsibility, kind of a prolonged adolescence, I suppose, that I think is pretty common in today's culture. Um, Fixated on my own goals. So yeah, just always hoping, like, you want to do the part, you want to do the initial part as often as possible, but you don't want the resulting part. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. Do you want
A
to be
lot
having
with
loads of sex, but you don't want the responsibility of dealing with the fucking repercussions of it? Like,
yeah, it can be a lot to take on. Especially when you have a lot going on with yourself. When I look at myself in my 20s and where my head was at,
mm,
um, no, I don't think I
mm,
was ever ready for it. And until it happened, I kind of felt right. Actually, I had to change, a big change.
mm. I suppose the lament in it, Ryan, is that it requires a huge amount of energy to raise children properly, uh, consciously and just physically. And I don't have, I mean, in my 20s, I had energy to burn. Um, and with maybe more maturity and with more of a society that maybe fostered young men earlier, and maybe more elders who fostered young men earlier around me, maybe that would have been there's something quite natural, I think, about maybe having kids earlier and then having your 40s and 50s to mature into your own self and to develop your own practices and develop your own hermitage and all of that time. Whereas when you have kids later, you're still raising kids, that little bit older. So I mean, look at there's many, whatever, like, there's somebody who could come on who has kids at 21 and say, yeah, right, at least you're some way aware by the time you're 40, and
Yeah.
you have that developed awareness to be able to sculpt and help and support developing minds. Um,
Is
yeah,
that something
yeah,
that you encounter a lot with the men's circles and the retreats and the groups that you bring together? Men
yeah.
dealing with families or kids and kind of still trying to deal with themselves as well.
Oh God, yeah, huge amount of it. Um, I mean, sometimes I feel like the tides have turned completely, because sometimes I look at the women around me and they're just off out communing with with the Great Spirit. Like, they're off out, I don't know, clearing land, or they're getting together for red tents, or they're getting together for the different celebrationary times of the year and the Celtic calendar, or whatever it is, monthly meetups, whatever, very basic, just but gathering. And they're not sitting around talking about how the relationship is with their man. Now, I think maybe there was a time when they used to, but they're not doing it now. They're about their work. That's what I'm seeing. Um, Maybe that's a particular cross section of women who I know, but the ones that I do know, that's what they're doing. They're not. I don't get any sense of them fucking around. Like, they're about their business. Whereas now, I couldn't say it for the retreats necessarily, but I notice sometimes when I go into those spaces with men that it's their relationship, trying to get a handle on their relationship, trying to show up emotionally in their relationship, trying to be good fathers, trying to find the new balance that's required to be a man who's out making in the world, because there's that ingrained belief that that's what you have to do, and mixed with the new belief that men also have to pick up 50% of the domestic work, or at least improve upon the amount of domestic work being done, and then trying to find the balance in that, how to be present fathers and also present in the workplace, or their relationships, and often that strain really tells on their primary relationship in terms of a human being, their primary relationship, which is their partner. That's where a lot of the conversation is, and I just sometimes I just it's like, wow, I think that's kind of turned full circle in a way.
When you talk about the relationships showing up and stuff with our kids and our family and our partners, and so I'm a single father, and I live 3.5 hours, 3.5 to 4 hours,
Yeah,
depending on the time of the day, away from my kid. And he's young, he's 3, so he lives with his mother, and time with me is, it's not a huge amount, but he's also at a very young and delicate age. So sometimes there's a part of me like, oh, I wish I could be there more. I want to be more there. I want to be there more, but I'm not, but I also have to accept this is where I'm at now as a father, and that's where he's at as a kid, in the sense of he needs to be nurtured by his mother, that she's his primary care. But I'm also making strides towards moving there, or having a base there that I can spend more time with him. But also at this moment in time, I'm always having to remind myself to to be patient, to show up for myself first, and to allow myself to know that I am still being a good father. I am still being present, when I'm with them. And my time with them is I get him once a month for a few days, and then maybe every second month for two weekends a month, and I really put that down to the quality
yeah,
of the time as opposed to the quantity, and that allows me to, I suppose,
absolutely,
feel like I am showing up and I am doing a good job, because there is parts where you doubt yourself, and as if you're not doing enough.
for sure. Yeah, I suppose every individual situation is different, but I certainly believe in the acknowledgement of the single mother who's picking up that time. That there's that acknowledgement. I think is crucial. Like showing up in that way, and in your providership in that way, and regardless of what way you're providing in that way, but that you're showing up and acknowledging that. That's one part of it. And the other part of it then is, I suppose, the more ephemeral part of it. It's done for a reason by, the tribes, the Amazonian tribes or whoever it is, who, the men leave the village some night when the child turns 11 or 12, and they go off out into the forest and they prepare a camp, and then they come back in painted in black muck or whatever it is, and they raid the village and they take the children, and there's a play, like an actual, like a drama enacts itself, where the men take the child from the mother. Jesus, it sounds so traumatic, but I mean, this is what they do, and the mother is in on it. The mother knows, and the father knows. This is an essential break now that needs to happen at 12. And so, okay, there's some ideal world or some ideal situation where you have the two up, two down, and you're the husband and she's the wife, and you've got your balance sorted and everything. But sure, I don't know. I don't know whoever's leading that perfect life. Like, well done to you. I don't know. I don't see a huge amount of it around me. In the situation that you're in, I think that there's definitely a great natural process involved there, where you're working, as you said, you're working on showing up and being in your own strength for the time where at, I think, 10, 11, 12, at that age, that's when when your child really comes into seek that masculine presence, seek that the presence of the man and the father. That's not to say it's not ideal at all stages. It's not to, to give ourselves a free pass on the rearing of a child. Like, we certainly have our own feminine instincts, and we certainly have a caring softness, and I see that in men at all the retreats. The great softness of men is a really beautiful thing to observe and feel around you. More so than women in some regards. But when it comes to the rearing of a child, yeah, I definitely think that's the mother is most qualified at that point, and the father is most qualified maybe as they get older. Ideally, that can be done together, where you can step in and out of your femininity and your masculinity, because that's an important part for the development and emergence of a man and a woman anyway. But in a situation where, like, maybe you could be living together and be at each other's throat, and then the child sees you in a weakened state, her in a weakened state, and they grow up to think that that's what love is. I mean, that's 10 times worse in many regards. So if you're in that situation, as many men are, and I meet many men who are in that situation, I think the most honourable thing that can be done is for you to step into your work as an individual. And it's hard, I think, to step into work as an individual, because you're really only answerable to yourself. At least when you've got someone beside you, you're like, okay, well, you've got some kind of measure or someone who you can say, well, I want to step up for her, if you can't find that in yourself. But when you do acknowledge the necessity for it for yourself, and you do start showing up and you do start doing that work, which, I've a good idea from talking to you for a brief time, that's what you're doing. I think you're in that ideal preparation stage for when you are really needed. And I don't know, I'm the same as you, Ryan. I don't, like, I'm talking about the tribes in the Amazon. I mean, I don't know what that looks like, because my kids are still in that nurturing stage. And I'm, Jesus, I'm doing, probably doing awful damage in some respects, being in so much at this stage as well, because that subtlety and skill isn't there that I can see that my wife has. But yeah, I think in that situation, it's the great honourable thing to do is prepare for that time. And I think you obviously already know that, and that's what you're doing.
I never like to think that I know. I always just like to think that I'm doing the best I can with what I do know, so, but that's all I could do. Just keep showing up for myself and hopefully show up for him. The spaces that you provide, you give men an opportunity to come, and I suppose you said something there is like to be in their softness, to allow themselves to not always be so hard, I would say. Would that be right? To let go of that hardness?
Yeah.
Why is that important?
Well, to me, it's important because of the expanse of the human condition. Like, I mean, I certainly see the benefit of cold plunges in the morning and taking your, whatever supplements and vitamins you need, and, going for a run and lifting weights and doing all the right things, and, doing all the right things all the time. But it's not the totality of us either. Like, there is depths of us to be explored. I don't feel like I put those depths there in myself. I think they're just there to be explored. And so okay, if I'm doing it and I'm on it all the time, and I feel great, and that's great. That's functional. But I get very attached when I'm in that space to the physical, because I'm navigating the physical. I'm doing that, and there's a formula, and I'm doing it, and it's all working, and that's great. But, like, the inner world doesn't work off that same certainty at all. Like, it doesn't have that certainty within it. And the physical impacts that so much that when you take what's happening on the outside and bring it inwards and explore it, all that organization and structure kind of falls away a little bit, and you go into, what you might call dark waters, like, and there's an awful lot to be learned in those places, and there's an awful lot of humility to be found in those places. And sometimes I don't think it's right necessarily to recommend choosing them, or that people should do it or whatever, but regardless of what I think about it, or it's there. It's there, and for some people it sneaks up on them and it hits them like a ton of bricks, and they didn't know ever that it was going to come, or they maybe looked at people who suffered what we call depression or anxiety or whatever, and it hits them, and all of a sudden they realize. But consciously assuming those parts of yourself, like consciously putting on that robe to go down, I find there's an expanse in it. Maybe because I'm interested, maybe just for me, because I'm interested in working with other men who are afraid of that, have been through it, are going through it, know they need to go through it because the physical isn't working for them so well. Um, I have a calling of some kind inside of me to guide, or to at least create spaces where men can explore those things. So I'm interested in going down into them because I want to know where the light switches are down there when other men come down into the darkness and they don't know where those switches are. But I maybe that's I could only assume that's unique to me, not as though I'm the only one who does that work, but that's my own sense of it, I suppose. So providing those spaces, what I see in the aftermath of them is after going down and connecting with something, after going down into their grief. Generally, it's grief, just grief of some kind. It might come out as rage or some kind of outburst, or it could be just fucking bawling, crying for hours and hours, or whatever it is, in front of other men, and and welcomed by other men. Like I'd always say that to the lads as well. It's like in your Kirkquigga, in your orientation towards somebody, when they go, like when they really go, when the room is just, when it's kicking off, and you can see it's in, and somebody's maybe going, or a few people are going, to have in your orientation, in your spirit, in your orientation towards them, to be thinking, is that all, or is there more? Like, what else? What else? Not, oh Jesus, isn't that weird the way he's shouting, like, or, oh, should we be doing this? Is this okay? Like, or, to like, to welcome it, and to even to inquire, is there further depths that they could go to? If they've gone that far, can they surrender further? And coming away from it, then they seem to have this feeling of just a deeper connection to something inside themselves, that when they come then back to the surface, and we always have to put on back on the armor and go back into the world, but you're more aware that that's what you're doing, and there's a deeper stillness in meeting all of the myriad of different challenges that we have in the physical plane. So the retreats, in some senses, are not retreats. The retreats are that's hard work. So life becomes a retreat. So we get together for a weekend and we go in and do some hard work, and then life becomes more of a retreat. Life becomes what we term, or what we view a retreat to be, which is a bit of softness, a bit of ease, a bit of flow, a bit of taking care, a bit of, that's what you expect on a retreat, a bit of nourishment, whatever. But in actual fact, the retreat is the opportunity, the weekend is the opportunity to do hard work, so life can flow.
You said something there that was very
yeah.
well said. Now, you go into them dark places to turn on them lights. I would say that there's a lot of men that don't believe or think that the light can reach them places.
Well, firstly, there's a lot of men who don't believe that there's even a room down there. When you're down there, yeah, I remember that feeling. I'm sure you do too.
Mm-hmm.
Of thinking it'll never be right. Of thinking it's always going to be this way. It's always going to be this dark. I'm always going to be this uncertain. I'm always going to be this at sea with no place to rest my head. I've no fucking place to rest my head. Jesus, I remember. Yeah, it's a real tough time, man. It's a tough time. it's a tough time, and I don't proclaim either to have, you know, that answer to where an individual's light is, but I feel certain conditions can be created where men who are struggling in some way can come and surround themselves with a group of men who are orientated towards healing themselves, or towards caring for themselves, or towards looking after themselves in some way, and also want that for everybody else in the group. And then certain practices that I know bring things to light, and the responsibility always still falls to them. You know, I'm a big believer in that. Like, I really hate any idea of, and I sensed it earlier. I don't sense it anymore, but I did sense it earlier, of people kind of coming to me, like seeing something in me and saying, "You have something that I need." Because I remember that when I was hurling. You know, I remember the mistakes that I made there. I went down into the ego version of that, and it really didn't serve me well at all in my life. And so I stay away from it now as much as, maybe I err on the wrong side of it. I'm not sure, but I would be a fan of the kind of Krishnamurti style of introspection, which is like, you take responsibility for your own life, you take responsibility for your own introspection, you take responsibility for what's there. These things can guide you, and myself and Michael are there as guides, and we will wrap in around somebody, or we will hold somebody, or we'll do whatever we can to support them. But like, we're creating a space, we're gathering a group, we're going to do certain practices that we know are very, very helpful for all kinds of different things. But ultimately, it's down to yourself. You have to go in and you have to do that work. And you'll have every opportunity to not do it, but you will have one opportunity to do it. And we recommend you take it, because if enough people take it, everybody's swept up. Everybody's swept up. There's no, like when you're doing a sweat lodge, man, you know, like when you're doing a sweat lodge and everybody's in, that's when, like, I have goosebumps even talking about it. Like, that's when my role as the holder of the lodge is like almost null and void. It's just on. It's fucking on, man. It's on. Like, it's just it's just, you know, there's just medicine, big medicine, waiting for everybody. But if people don't do it, if people hold back, and you can feel the holding back, you can feel it, then you lose the opportunity. You know, you lose the chance.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to change, you know, and responsibility too. I mean, you know, I know too. It, it's a big shift in your reality. Usually, you know, your life may come crumbling down. Everything that you know as it was may have to be reknown. The people may have to be reknown. Um, and a lot of people cling on to that. You know, they cling on to what they think is their comfort, you know, but maybe don't see that actually there is a you know, a better place beyond that.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to be careful with it for sure, in terms of like the psychic cliff that somebody can fall off if you go too far, if you go too far down, you know. But to date, myself and Michael, the way that we work, I mean, Michael really goes down into the depths. I'm much more interested in the last few years in the likes of the Sweat Lodge, in the power of the hurling, in getting fellas wrestling, getting fellas into their body, experiencing joy. You know, that's really my role on the retreat in many respects, is to experience that joy. I mean, the Sweat Lodge is a little bit different for sure. That's, we can get into some heavy territory there, but Michael would hold a lot of the deeper work, and whatever that balance is, that's the one of probably the most common feedback we get. Whatever that balance is of Michael holding me down here and Diarmuid holding me up here, we're, I, yeah, I think there's definitely been. I don't recall, or I haven't seen anybody, or I haven't heard anybody kind of come back and say, "Jesus, I went off a cliff there." It's more, we're trying to just bring that awareness, give the lads the opportunity to become aware of the possibilities and the options that they have about what they what they wear, or what they assume, what they assume about themselves, that that you can stand back and observe, that you can go in and you can taste and you can feel some of the things that you're afraid to taste and feel, and realize they're not so bad, um, or that it wasn't maybe worth the amount of stress that it caused to avoid it. Um, but I think it's a lot of it definitely is just that ability, a really, really, really simple and fundamental truth of just our ability to know that this is a momentary mask that I put on, and I can take it off, and I remember now that I'm doing that, and I also remember that there's something very deep within me that also needs to come out, and that generally would come out as that kind of wilder version of ourselves, and I really encourage that with the lads, just, and not, really, I dislike, I'm very uncomfortable if that's howling at the moon for the sake of howling, like anything that's not an authentic um, expression of that. I'm really interested in fellas feeling that, we give them wild deer, and fuck it, I can put it up on the fire and just take a bit off and hand it to somebody, and they're standing there with a big lump of deer in their hand, and they're fucking gnawing at it, and I'm like, yes, that's feed the wild man inside yourself, because he needs to be fed, and he needs an outlet, because in society the wild man is really, really feared, and understandably so. But to have a space for that, and I know from the outside looking in, people like who've never experienced that, they might scoff at it, but we get one of the most beautiful pieces of feedback we get, and we get it quite often, is women who write to us and say, "Thanks for bringing my man back." It's just like they're like, "Oh, my man is back!" Like my fucking that fella, like that old fucking that old that old stag that I married by. He's back, Like it's lovely, that's really lovely. That's a really lovely thing. Um, and it's outside of that. Yeah, easy judge it for sure. Easy to say, well, this is how the world works, and that's ha ha ha. Like look at them. But like when you're in it, and when you're overpowered by your own wild man who doesn't want to do any damage, who doesn't want to break anything, he doesn't want to hurt anything, he doesn't, he'd, and I've seen it happen. Like a big wild man who's a really good friend of mine, who we not, a deer was hit on the road outside Killarney, and he was in it. He was fully in what we were in at the time, and a deer was hit, and your man drove on, and we got out, and I was like, lovely, let's put it up on top of the car and bring it home, and we'll skin it and we'll eat it. Um, and the big wild man picked that deer up on the side of the road, and he walked over into the road, and he walked down into the forest in Killarney National Park, and he lay down and he put his head down on the chest of the deer, and he lay there for, I don't know, for maybe half an hour, until that deer took its last breath, and then he left it and walked away. Like that kind of, there's a great depth and a great care in that wild man that people don't realize is there. The power and the energy and the enthusiasm to know what to do, what's the right thing to do right now. And it might defy all logic, but it's the right thing because the man knows. He just knows. And I really value that part of men, and I lament in some ways society shutting that avenue down, because there's also a shadow to it, and we see that shadow to it, and that shadow is awful. There's no doubt about that, and women are entitled. Not that it's just women shutting us down; it's whatever is in men as well that are ashamed of it are shutting it down, and understandably so. But there's an element of the baby in the bathwater, I suppose. We do have to find more ways to allow that power it's time, because it's not all shadow, it's not all dark, it's not all manipulation, it's not all that. It's profoundly beautiful as well.
Mm. You talk about the joy as well, and I have seen some of your work where you're playing, hurling, and there's a bit of rough and tumble, and I think as the older we get, we lose that. Maybe we play it with their kids, etc. But um, in ourselves, that wildness, it's very unusual that a lot of us would carry that through. And what does that bring to the men in that circle, in that space when you provide it? What is it that's bringing out in us?
I'm always mystified by the wide variety of different things that people bring back from that. Like, just the experience of joy for the experience of joy in itself is most definitely one of them. When it comes to the likes of the wrestling, there's a couple of different areas that I think stand out most, and maybe this is just because of my own experience as well. Is that I'm afraid. There's a part of me is afraid. I'm afraid if I have to take on Ryan McDade now that I'm going to be beaten, and you might hold my head down on the ground, and I have to deal in front of a group of 20 men with the shame of being beaten. That's what I'm afraid of. That I'm afraid of being beaten. I'm afraid of being beaten and looking weak in front of other people. That's a residual tension that I think men carry into an awful lot of interactions. We won't push back. We won't speak our mind. We won't say no because we're afraid that where it might end up is me with my face in the ground being held, and I'm weak, and my weakness is on display. And it's really only it's really playing with the very early stages of that. It's really not any deeper, but it is getting beaten, like welcoming getting beaten, and welcoming the feeling of that shame. I was like, oh, there it is. There's that thing I'm running from. There it is. Jesus, it's actually not so bad. So I don't need to be owned by it anymore. I can take this, and maybe if I don't have the fear, maybe I'll actually just be stronger in the next one, and I'll be the one holding him down, and I'll have that, and then I can take that into all my interactions, where I can just stand up and say, no, that's not right. What you're saying there, I can't agree with that, and that we would have that kind of response from meeting the thing that we're most afraid of, which is, I think, one of them being our weakness being unveiled. So I think meeting that is a lovely opportunity for fellas, because otherwise we avoid it. That's like nobody will ever. We're not going around asking each other for little wrestles. I mean, we are now, but we used to be maybe. And I think it's lovely because it's playful, it's physical. You see obviously the combat sports are huge, but I just love it beside a river, like out in the grass, out in the field, just fucking right. Sure, let's have a wrestle and see what happens. So I see getting beaten being one of the great advantages, or one of the great learnings, one of the key learnings of it. Um, Limitation. I'm a big fan of learning by limitation, meeting your limitations. And fellas realize, fuck, I'm a bit weaker than I should be. They realize they're not as fit as they should be. They realize they've been abandoning certain things that they really should be taking care of, and that meeting that limitation, instead of protecting them from the limitation, we meet the limitation. And once you meet the limitation, you act. You meet that limitation, you act. That's invariably what happens. Fellas meet it, they're like, okay, I have to address some things. I need to cut the drink out, I need to cut the fags out, I need to cut not looking after myself out, I need to start training. Like, they make those, they in meeting the depths of their struggle physically, that's the point. That's the next point they arrive at. It's like, okay, this has to change. So I really think that limitation provides a huge insight. Um, and then other than that, yeah, I think there's definitely a variety of things, and the rest of it generally stems around some form of joy. And where I again am most thrilled by that is when the magic comes in. I love when the magic comes in. The fella who drops every single ball that comes to him, who's clearly terrible at hurling, not in his body or whatever. And then like the last ball, when it's like, I'll always go, it'll be like, it could be like 7-0 to one team, and I'm like, right, first to three, and we go first to three, and it could be 2-all, and then a ball comes up, and your man sticks his hand up in the heavens, and he doesn't know what he's doing, and he doesn't need to, because he's not. It's not him doing it anymore. It's the magic is in, and once the magic is in, he puts his hand up, the ball's landing in his hand, and that's him fucking made. Like that's like the joy in those fellas, and I see that when the spirit of the game is played right. A big part of the game is that what we're interested in doing is creating the conditions for everyone to learn more, not for us to win. Now, sport being sport the way it is, it's about winning, and that's fine. But the games we play, it's not about winning. It's not the win at all costs philosophy. It's that we would take care of each other well enough that everybody learns, everyone grows. So when you're tackling somebody, you tackle with what they need. You don't tackle, if I'm tackling you, you're a big hardy fella, I'm going to give you 100% because you're well able for. I might be tackling a smaller fella who's not in his body, and I can only give him 10%. I can't give him 100%. If I give him 100%, I'll kill him. And that's okay. I'm going to come back into the village with the deer over my shoulder saying, everybody look at me, I got the deer. But it's the journey, it's the listening, the learning all along the way is where the real, that's where the catching and the killing of the deer is. It's the whole learning to read the wind, it's learning to track, it's all that stuff. So if you ride roughshod over that, you come back with that fella. I'm the fella who won, like, you know. But when the spirit of that game is played properly, when everybody is taking care of each other, it's still physical, it's still full on, it's still heavy going. It's not soft, but there's, we want everybody to have the maximum experience they can. And when the spirit is, when the game is played in that spirit, every single time magic happens. And every time it's played in the spirit of I want to win, where that just creeps over the line, no magic happens. And I'm seeing that 100% that reigns true for me, you know. So yeah, those three things: jamming with the nature, you know, that bit of magic, meeting limitation, and meeting meeting a defeat.
I actually started Jiu Jitsu a few months ago, and you know, when you were talking about that's what
Oh
was
my,
coming up for me, I was thinking about that wrestling on the ground. And
yeah,
when I started, it was grand because all beginners, but then you move up into the mixed ability class. But when I would be going, I'd be like, oh fuck's sake, you know. There was a resistance there because I know I'm going to be wrestling with fellas who are more advanced and are going to beat me. But when I was just able to let go, that's just, you know what, that, because that's the ego, you know, my ego, it doesn't want to get beat, but also knowing that there's actually lessons through this, you know, they're going to pin me down, they're going to choke me or whatever, but I know that through each one of them defeats, each one of them learnings, that I'm going to keep getting better and better and better. And I take it with ease now. You know, I'm able to go on that. So I don't care if I win or lose. You know, I'm just going to go in here and learn as much as I can. And when I'm able to apply that, it becomes a lot more fun. You know, it's not like this pressure, and like it's like, and when you're talking to two, I feel like there's letting go of the ego. You know, dissembling it so that we can just be in whatever way it is that we need to be. And I think a lot of men are always we're in our ego a lot of the time.
yeah, yeah. We feel the need to protect ourselves from something, from ourselves, protecting ourselves from ourselves. Yeah, it's a great movement, the jiu-jitsu. And yeah, I've total admiration for the fellas who do it. I probably need to take a dose of my own medicine as well. Like, I mean, I'm doing plenty, but I know I know I'm resisting that. I know I'm resisting the jiu-jitsu. I can feel it calling me. So yeah, let's see.
Yeah. But also I think it's a part of me getting older too. I think there was a part of me always curious about that side of life, you know, of getting into that, just being in a rough and tumble, you know, because as kids, it's something I'd done a lot, you know, just with your friends and family. And then as you get a bit older, I think there's more of a fear there. Again, that's the ego. But then as I got a little bit older, then I was able to break that down and just think, fuck it, who cares? Let's just go, and able to enjoy it so much freely than I would have had before, and I think that's what I got. I've been to other retreats too, not to yours, but there's always that like letting go of that like that mask, as you say, that we or that person we're always being, trying to protect ourselves and just letting go at the door and I just it's just it's like we allow ourselves to step into a different version of ourselves and to connect with others, and it's like that tribe as well where we can come together and just listen and support each other, something that we don't tend to do that often.
There seems to be great unity in the Jiu Jitsu, yeah?
There is I have to say I was really impressed with the community. I couldn't believe how friendly and
Mm.
just welcoming it was. It's a community that I've never been into before, but I think is it because we're all kind of on the same road? We're all like all the people there are a lot older. I mean, I say a lot older. Most of them are in their 20s and 30s, and they all started it in at that age. So, and again, there's no egos. It's a joke and a laugh. Um, it's definitely very welcoming. I would recommend anyone who's interested to get into it. It's not as scary as it may look on the TV.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll take that as an invite.
But it's early days yet, Diarmuid. I've only started in September, and even at that, I'm using a lot of muscles that I haven't used before. So slight little injuries here and there, but just having to
Mm.
persevere, because
Mm.
your movement's a lot different, and you're rolling around different parts of your bodies, and sometimes there's big lads on you, and it's it's a long road. I'd say for me, it's just I'm taking a lot of consistency while I can I travel a lot, but discipline too, and just the fighting that resistance every time. I don't want to go every single time. Like fuck this, but I'm like nah. Once you go and do it, it's so much better. You just feel there's just a there's definitely a good dopamine hit.
Yeah, I went back playing over 40s hurling last year, and I played junior B with the club as well, like back playing hurling. And I suppose I feel like I've spent quite a while now being a student of life, like, and I don't mean that in a glorious way. I mean like in the struggle of being a student, of not knowing. I've been in a lot of environments where I just don't. I'm the one that knows the least in the room or whatever, and I spent a while in that, and I probably associate that learning maybe with a time of struggle as well, because I was just looking and seeking for some kind of solidity or something to rest my head on. But now when I go back to hurling, um, it's an area of mastery for me, and I don't have mastery of anything else, but I have mastery of that. And that doesn't mean I've mastered the game. The game is always changing, but like I have mastery in my body. My body knows what to do all the time on the field, and that's been such a rich discovery. This beautiful, caring woman who's coming to me.
You got wrapped up there, and it's not a night to be sitting out.
I got a sheepskin under
Lovely.
me. I got a sheepskin under me. I got a blanket around me, and I got a cup of tea. And that kind of care and these moments of softness, because we've definitely been we're in a process still of figuring each other out. And sometimes there's flashpoints, especially with kids, where you're just overtaxed, or Siobhan's breastfeeding for a year, and I don't take it into consideration enough. I just am like, okay, that's one child fed. I'll deal with the other two. Like, so I forget how much of a commitment that is, and then she has her own desires for her life, and so you don't always maintain awareness of that, and that comes back on the other side as well. And so these moments of softness where we just do something for each other, kind of softens all of that, you know.
Yeah, I was reading your blog, and you speak very kindly of your wife.
I suppose it's like it's the same when I go away, you know, like when I'm not at close quarters, when I'm not triggered, when I'm not in my wound, when I'm not locking up and saying, "Oh, fucking, I've got a right now to go into silence because I'm hurt or because I'm, you know, feel rejected or whatever it is." Like it's very easy at a distance. It's very easy to write about it because the woman has so much richness. It's quite, you know, it's all quite evident and very easy to write about in many respects. But yeah, I have a bit of work to do to keep those connection lines open when the last thing you want to do is connect, you know. Because it also undermines my work. Those moments I feel undermine my work. Like if I go through a period where I don't deal skillfully or if I don't deal well, I have to give myself, you know, I can't be fucking hammering myself for it. But if I feel that I'm not dealing with my relationship well, or if I'm not dealing with my son well, or if I'm not dealing with something well, I, I find it very hard to go into the space with the men. And try and represent something, or try and, like, you know, try and carry something in that they see and say, good, I'm in safe hands, good, that's great, I can go as far as I want now. I find that part of it difficult, but I've kind of gone away anyway very much in myself. Like men's work, I'm not really a big kind of, I don't feel like, I feel the people who do men's work and who talk about the philosophies of it and stuff like that, I find a lot of benefit in it, but I don't feel any great draw to men's work. I feel like I'm providing a retreat space for men to come and do their work. It's just for men. There's not. We do mixed retreats with Wild Irish Retreat with Siobhan. I'll do a deer tanning retreat here in a few weeks, and that's going to be mixed. So I'm totally open to the mixed spaces, but like the work I do with Michael, there is people doing men's work around the country. I don't particularly feel like I'm one of them. I feel like just creating a space that's only open to men to come and do their work, and I think there's a subtle difference there, or I feel at least I need to justify to my weaknesses and infallibility and my uncertainties and my failings that I'm not in some position of like, this is how it is, you know. I know how it is. It's like, no, I'm emerging too, you know. I'm emerging the same as everybody else, and I kind of want that permission from them sometimes, and it flies in the face, I think, of a facilitator. Maybe facilitators come in and they're the ones who know. I tend to go in, most of the time I tend to go in and kind of say, look I don't choose who holds and who's held, and I don't want the responsibility of choosing who's held and who holds. And not because I'm afraid of either of those two things. I very much welcome both. I love holding. It's one of the great privileges of life to hold somebody in there when they go, you know. But equally, it's a great privilege to be doing the holding. And I want to leave that possibility open to the fellas who come on the retreats as well. It's like, maybe you have come with your cup full, and maybe even though there's a financial arrangement here, and we can all cling to that financial arrangement and say, I've paid my 400 quid you give me healing. It's like, well, I don't know what your healing is. Maybe the greatest healing experience you're going to have now is you see that fella over there. There's some connection between you because it's just fucking, there's a connection. I didn't decide what it was. I didn't book him on it for you. There's a connection between you. There's something in the stars. There's something there. I can see it between you. You can see it between you. You're beside each other all the time. You're going through something now, or he's going through something now that you went through 10 years ago, and you've got medicine for him. And when he goes, you're going to hold him. Now, I can step in and I can hold him, fine, but I don't think that's where the medicine is. I don't think that's where your medicine is. I think your medicine is going to be in holding him. And I find it, not to be critical of anybody else, but I would find it arrogant for myself to decide that I'm the one going to hold all the men. I think, you know what, maybe I'm going to go. I have that. I do have a little bit of license with that because I know Michael is going to be there. I know Michael is not going to, he's not going to go. He's going to stay. He's going to hold because he does that. He just does that so well. So maybe I do have a little bit of license because Michael is there, but I also do find, and this is from going to Earth Song and, you know, being in those morning prayers and seeing people who are the holders letting go and then seeing people hold them who think they're there to be held and realizing that those role reversals are, that's a deeper world than my little head can understand or desire to control. And so I kind of believe in that, you know. Now there's times when I come in and I feel really strong and I don't believe that. I don't believe that. But there's other times where I do, where I feel that that's more real. And I do want to be real. I want to be real in my life. I want to be real with my children. I want to be real with my wife. I want to be real with the lads on the retreats. I just want to be real. I don't want to be a men's worker or to be holding space, or I don't want to be doing any of those things. I just want to be real. Like, this is okay. This is it. This is where it's at. This is where we are. This is who I am. This is who you are. Okay, that's fucking clear. That's clean. Let's go. Let's see where we can go. And I think you can get, like, you know, I've hidden behind theories and philosophies in the past, and I don't want to do that anymore. I just want to be there with the lads, you know, really in it with them. I find that to be very beneficial.
Well, my understanding is that you're the one that's creating the space, you know, and then it's up to the likes of whoever wants to come to be part of that space. And it's actually something I'm curious about too. You know, I haven't been, but you see the work that you do, and I'm like, it's something that I'd like to experience. You know, I always know that going to something like that, I don't always have an agenda, but there's always going to be something that I'll take from it. You know, there'll be a teaching, there'll be a lesson, there'll be a connection, and these are the kind of things that I've been to in the past, and I have to say, the kinds of things that I've got a lot from. I think the most valuable is the people that I meet. That you meet them on a deep level. There's no facade. There, you know, they just drop guard.
Yeah. I mean, that's where it. We come away at times. I remember it happened, or I realised, I suppose, that it happens with Wild Irish Retreat with Siobhan. We'd spend days or weeks talking about this and talking about that, and we'd do this workshop, and we could do this, and we'd go in and break up the workshops and say, okay, what about doing this? And then you'd come away, like, and you'd get the feedback, or we'd have the closing circle on the Sunday, and, you know, people's high point was a conversation that they'd had with somebody else they'd met who knew intimately what the shape and the colour of their struggle was, or what the shape and the colour of their life was in some way, and or else it'd be just something in the nature, you know, they'd head off for a walk themselves and they'd have some moment of connection because they're in a heightened state, and they'd have some connection with nature that opens up a whole other world for them. And there you are with your plans, you know. we're going through this and we're going through that, and at the end of it, you could only really arrive at the realization that all I did was got them together, and then something else, uh, did the magic or worked the magic for them. You know.
What sparked you to walk that path? Was it a defining moment?
I mean, there was many defining moments, but there was, like, the first time the thought entered into my head, I suppose, I had learned I had seen the art of facilitation when I was in Dublin, after I'd finished hurling with the SOAR Foundation, and a fella came over from Australia called Tom Harkin, who he runs Tomorrow Man in Australia, and I saw him facilitating like group healing, group work, and I saw how he read the dynamics of a room, and he was a master, and I was just thinking, fucking hell, there's something magical there. Like, you can have, like, I would never have thought that one person's healing in a group of 30 people brings healing to 30 people. Like, that's not something that I ever would have thought in group dynamics is a thing that happens. But when I was observing Tom and looking at the SOAR work that happened on the back of that, the stuff that Jim Steins had started in Melbourne with the Reach Foundation, like, that's what was happening. Like, somebody would undergo, that's John Moriarty talks about that, like, in the time of the world's night, somebody has to go down into the abyss. Turtle goes down into the abyss is the story. Like, somebody has to go, and when somebody goes in the group, they kind of bring everybody else with them, or they come back up with such gold that when they share it, it's undeniable to everybody, and it mirrors some journey that they had to go on too. I don't know I'm only trying to intellectually understand what's happening, but there's a healing that takes place for 30 people when one is willing to go. That's good news, because one by one is an arduous task. If you can do it in 30s, that's less arduous. When I was on the Blasket Islands, I suppose I was undergoing a healing when I was on the Blasket Islands. There's no doubt about that. And at some stage on that healing, I decided I'd love to run a retreat here. That was a thought that I had. So that was like the initial idea that there was a retreat. But really all that came online when I met Siobhan. That became a possibility when I met Siobhan. I said, geez, there's this place out there. Do you want to come out and have a look? And then we just decided we were going to run a retreat. We'd play hurling, we'd do yoga, we'd forage seaweed, we'd camp, we'd, just live wild for a weekend. And a bunch of people signed up for it, and the boats couldn't go, and we found out early in the week, so we just moved it to this building in Ballyferret or Brunagraga. And then we started, and I was still carrying in the SOAR work of facilitating people's healing, whereas Siobhan was coming much more about education, like rerouting ourselves in our education, knowing what the wild plants are, knowing where the wild medicines are, knowing where the wild food is, communicating with power and with strength, and standing up to any forms of aggression or violence towards people who maybe otherwise mightn't be able, empowering people to step into their own voices, that kind of stuff. So the two of us were playing around with that area, and sometimes I resisted some of her stuff and sometimes she would have resisted some of my stuff, but it definitely triggered something, and it was all brought together under the banner of the language. And the language we found to be an area that probably met all of those areas. I mean, the hurling and the language have, obvious links going back to our mythology, in terms of the living of lice, the healing herbs of nature. The names of the herbs would have some inclination as to what the medicine of that herb would be. Lusna Canava Brishta is the plant of broken bones, so that's what you need for broken bones. So the wisdom is in the language. When it came to seaweed, all of these things, there was outdoor classrooms where people were learning and experiencing the language in a way that it wasn't sitting down and saying, right, this is the Mokaniluk or this is the Imshiroshniluk or whatever. The sweat lodge, again, an ancient Irish tradition, where people just sweat away stuff that they need to sweat away, whatever it was, relationship stuff, violences that they'd done in past iterations themselves, whatever it was. The sweat lodge is an obvious tool used by the Irish for health benefits, but also sacramentally to release and let go, to sweat out the things that they had done. Yoga, meditation, stuff that we brought in from the East, things that came into Ireland, I suppose, 10, 15 years ago in a big way, that opened us up and reminded us of our own traditions. And that's where the wrestling has come in for me, is like, only after the fact I realised that the wrestling tradition in Ireland, like in wrestling, there are a load of moves that have Irish names because the Irish were renowned wrestlers back in the day. The stick fighting, the shillelaghs, we do a little bit of that stuff on the retreats as well, and just really the language opened up. It was a real kind of opening into all those areas, and then I was out there on the fringes learning about those things and then bringing them back into maybe more what I would term to be conservative environments, less so with the men's retreats, more so with the teams. When I bring GA teams out into the forest for weekend camps and stuff like that, it's more baby steps with them. They're not, I'm not in the depths with those fellas. It really is baby steps to some degree, because it's not an environment they're very comfortable in. Any form of emotion, any form of openness, any form of vulnerability, any form of talk, even any talk of surrender is an offence to them. So I've taken those things and I suppose applied them then where I feel they're most beneficial, and so has all come in, or the vast majority of that has come in since I met Siobhan. She really opened up a different world to me, like to be cooking at the campfire, to be at the fire. I don't think I've sat at a fire with Siobhan in 8 years where she's like, geez, I can't leave the fire, it's hard to leave the fire. Like, she'll always want to stay till the fire goes out. Like, she won't leave a fire, and everybody else they'll walk off, like, not think anything of it because it's time to leave, at 6 o'clock I've got to go and do something. But Siobhan's like, well, sure, look, at when the fire goes out, I suppose that's the time to go, that's the law and order that she follows. So that's what kicked it off. And then when I met Michael Ryan, I could see Michael had complementary skills to what I had, and that we could work well together. And that's how it's proven to be. And then there's just other areas that I'm interested in, kind of meeting these parts myself. Like in the Burren last year, or a couple of years ago, we did a deer tanning retreat where we brought in 7 deer. I had 15 skins saved up. We butchered the 7 deer, skinned them, tanned the skins, tanned the hides, smoked them, and everyone went away with a deer skin from their weekend's work. And then in that we did yoga, we did meditation, we had sharing circles, and the sharing circles on the deer tanning retreat, without doing any kind of breath work, anything like that, the sharing in those shares was fucking incredible. It was all men, and the sharing in them was just so bare and so raw and so beautiful. So it comes in like those, the protection of some of our pastimes, some of our traditions, like the language, or like the deer tanning, or like the dry stone walling, or whatever. Like, there are practitioners of these things that don't have the same network that I have. So I like to try and create a stage for them to come and to do their work, so more people get to learn these crafts that otherwise, we lose them to modernity. And that's all kind of comes under the umbrella of, I think, of Wild Irish Retreat and what we're trying to do. They're all, I think, valuable things, and everybody who comes and experiences them certainly they're drawn by that same feeling. And when people are drawn by the same feeling, by the same story, they're drawn by a similar story, it really creates bonds where I see now, oh, those fellas are working together. They came on the retreat 5 years ago, didn't even know each other, but everybody's coming in with the same belief, so the bonds are clear, and things are growing outside of any of the spaces that we would have created, and that's a real that's very life affirming to say, good, that's a good track. And then our elders as well are people who we would look at as our elders. Maybe in age they mightn't be our elders, but in terms of their experiences, the likes of Manacon, McGann, who always every retreat we've ever run with Wild Irish Retreat, the following day he seems to meet somebody who was on it, and I get an email from Manacon talking about the great feedback that he got from whoever it was. Ronan O'Snuddig would be another one. People who I would idolise in many respects. Really celebrating that work and celebrating the need for it and celebrating that it's just being done. That's kind of enough to quell the doubts that come in from day to day when we mightn't be doing so much.
I feel that's what you're doing is it's just the start. I feel like as time moves on now that there's going to be more and more. I think that you're one of the forerunners in this space in Ireland. With the wildness of it, like the wild Irish, and the
Feels like that,
the
yeah.
Irish culture, yeah, and like the hurling and stuff. I think it's going to have a big impact.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I suppose sometimes I get caught in a very some way, kind of a negative way of thinking about it. That I do feel I wouldn't ever put the title on myself, but I would say it about Siobhan with ease. That the work she does is it's blazing a trail. She's ahead of her time. She's whatever 3, 4, 5 years ahead of her time. More and more people are doing stuff with the Irish language now in terms of that rewilding that goes along with the language, and that's great to see. This work with the teams or the men's work, you see loads of people doing the men's work, the teams. I think we're going to start to see that creep in. That idea of connection, how to build connection to your teammates, how to build connection to yourself, how to build connection to your place. I think those things are going to improve, and I feel like I'm probably a couple of years ahead of the trend there. The thing is that I feel like I'm so in it that there's other people are going to come along who are better skilled at marketing it, and they'll capitalize on it properly, and I'll still be maybe just a couple of years ahead of that trend, doing something else, and still in some degree of poverty. But we have plans here. We have plans here for Wild Irish Retreat. Definitely in the place that we're living here in Kilkenny, we have big plans for here, and we're going to need the support of a community to make those plans manifest. But I think that when you put the call out for support on the basis of protection of language, protection of culture, protection of heritage, protection of native skills, a place to come that's a kind of a hermitage, and a place to come that's a temporary, even if it's a temporary retreat from a chaotic and crazy world. I would see great support coming from people, and I don't care whether it's financial support, physical support, doesn't matter what it is, but I would see people coming to support that, because I think there's a shared universal in an Irish or maybe in a native context. Not there's not a bone of nationalism in my body, to be honest, but I do have a sense of what's native, and I think when people sign up to the general care of our traditions and our stories, and that we're interested in finding stories that unite all of us, aside from geopolitical struggles, which are a different thing. I don't really have much time for that. I maintain my awareness of it, but I don't have much time for it. I think anybody who wants to take their place in adding to the cultural fabric of Ireland is, to me, a Gael, and I think that that can be welcomed, and we can work with that, if it's sincere and if it's real. And I think that I think people universally value inherent native wisdom, not wisdom that is kind of knowledge or masquerading as wisdom, but is actually a method of control. I think knowledge and wisdom that knows what it is itself, and that's based on, it's rooted in something very valuable and very beautiful. I think that will always be supported by Irish people, because we are, we have such a like, I fucking hell, man, and like, it makes me, it's so hilarious sometimes when you look across how orientated we were there for 25 odd years to America and American culture, or to British culture. British culture maybe less so, because that has more complexities to it in terms of our shared history. But certainly American culture and the cultural takeover that we experienced with America, probably in the 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever, when that stuff started getting beamed in here, like, it's infantile compared to our culture. And only in the last 10 years, I think, have we really started to turn inwards and orientate ourselves inwards and realize the gold that we're sitting on. And I'm here for that. That was, and only because, and you asked earlier, I suppose, what was the catalyst? That was probably the most significant catalyst, Ryan. The most significant catalyst was, I thought that to be a red-haired, freckled, little skinny fella carrying a hurl around Wexford was a source of shame, and fellas who had six packs and bouncy blonde hair or whatever were coming in from America on MTV or whatever it was. I thought that's what success looks like, or that's something to aspire to, only to realize that it was all the stuff that was inside of me was the most valuable thing to me. And that orientation and that shift, I think, that happened to me at a certain time, and it happened maybe a couple of years ahead, maybe a couple of years behind, I don't know, but it happened at a certain time anyway, where we were collectively undergoing that. We were collectively realizing that the external world is not the big story. What's internal, what's private to us, what's inside of us, and our responses and our reactions to things has great value, but also the things that inspire us and the things that drive us to learn to trust those things and not be ashamed of them. That was a significant shift for me, and what has come out has been the myths as archetypes. It has been the music and the culture and the language. It's been those things. I'm like, oh fuck, this is the stuff I was sitting on. This is the goal I've been sitting on all this time, and here I am, orientated outwards. And I think we're all in transition with that at the moment, and I think it's a great. Yeah, there's times where I'm heading off to what's called work, what I call work. Like, I'm heading off to run a retreat with a bunch of people, or I'm heading off to do a stag, or I'm heading off to bring this work to people, and I'm like, fuck, what a privilege. Like, what? I was like, there's times where I'm honestly driving the bus or the car, if the bus is broken down, as it usually is, but I'm driving whatever, the bus or the car, and I'm like, whoa, man, wow, this is the last thing you expected when you were a young fella. Like, this is unbelievable. Like, that's such a nice, it's so nice to observe yourself having that feeling, so nice to observe yourself having that feeling. Like, you're not swept up in the feeling for a moment, and then you're like, wow, that's so nice. Or I could be sitting around the fire, at the camps with the teams, or after a retreat, after a sweat lodge or something. I'm just sitting there blown away. I ran a stag in the Burren last year, and like this, in the sweat lodge, we built a sweat lodge, ran a sweat lodge, and the lads, like, they just went for it. Like, they were a few English fellas, a few Irish fellas, and the boys they were a rugby team, and they just went for it. Like, they just bared themselves completely to each other. Like, my God, it was, and not like, like, a couple of lads did it, and that was enough then, like, but a couple of lads did it. Like, one fella came out to the group, like, and it was just fucking, oh man, like, they were just really going for it. And I get to sit down at the fire after that on my own, and just like, that was work. I was at work there, and I, at one stage I was fucking rolling around with a fella, two of us bawling because he'd undergone a tragedy of immense scale, and he was just bawling, and I was bawling because he was bawling, and it was just fucking so beautiful. Like, it was so fucking beautiful. Like, it was so beautiful, heartbreaking, but like, these are the places we can go to. These are the places some fellas have to go to, because you're carrying so much. And like, I'm sure you've seen it. Like, I go into these circles at times. Like, I have fucking this and that, and I have this problem, I have that problem, and I have this relationship, whatever. And then I go to the circle and I hear what some fellas are going through. Like, my God, I'm just taking my stuff back and saying, you have some fucking respect. Have some respect for what people are going through. And don't be getting swept up in your own little fucking problems sometimes, Like really feel that at times when I hear some of the things that people are going through, Like really heartbreaking, really, really heartbreaking stuff. And that's what fellas are carrying. And it is heartbreaking to feel that there's fellas carrying that stuff and not saying it. I don't have an outlet to say it. I've nowhere to say it. So then when somebody does say it, like in that sweat lodge, and I feel a bit bare now for saying that, because maybe I shouldn't share what's happening in the sweat lodge. I keep that stuff close usually. But part of, I think, why I'm so fully in it in those moments with the likes of that fella who was after undergoing something serious is I'm so joyful as well. I'm so joyful that he's letting go. I'm so joyful that he's let go, Like my emotions are completely and utterly overwhelmed in sadness for him and in joy with him that he has this opportunity to let that go, because I know that there's so many fellas who are carrying it and they're not. They don't have an outlet, or they believe that they shouldn't say it, or nobody will listen to them, or whatever. And it's heartbreaking in a way. I don't know the fellas. I don't know who they are necessarily. I'm sure, like if I knew my friend was doing that, I'd be more broken hearted, because I'd know to say that I'm heartbroken that there's loads of fellas going around carrying that isn't quite true, because I need to know. I suppose I feel like I need to know the fellas to empathise with the person to be truly heartbroken. I don't think it's. I'd find it hard to say that I'm heartbroken for someone if I can't picture the person or something, I'm not sure. But I do still have this. I still have the sense that a lot of people are maybe in a bit of a vice. A lot of men are in a bit of a vice, a bit of a grip, that thinks that form of surrender is a weakness. And I know I can say to anybody now, this is all I can say is to anybody who's listening who maybe feels that, is that I've seen the fellas who've gone, they've let go, they've surrendered, and I've seen them grow. That fella who shared in that sweat lodge, I heard his voice change from the start of his acknowledgement of his sexuality to the end, and he was an immeasurably more powerful man by the end of his sentence. He was speaking, his sentence, his whatever, he was talking for maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes about that journey, and the fella who finished talking was a different man to the fella who started talking. It was 4 minutes. He was immeasurably stronger. He was immeasurably more present. He was immeasurably there in front of us, like we all could feel it. So I don't know where you get to do it, or I don't know who you do it with. I don't have all of those answers, but I do know that there's a form of surrender. It's not the surrender that's the white flag on the battlefield. It's a different type of surrender. And in that surrender is a great, great joy of kind of uncovering a part of yourself that otherwise you wouldn't ever have met. And often, perversely, that struggle is there to help you meet that part that you otherwise would never have met, because there's something there for you. That's as much now as I could say about that, and it's probably too much, but that's what I want to say about that.
Thank you for sharing. It's a very powerful share, Diarmuid. Not just that, but a lot of the stuff that you said, and I can feel you talking from the heart. There's just a lot of passion there with what you do, and it's really nice to see that you really care about what you do. I've really, really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope there are people, or men and women, who will take this. I've no doubt that there is, but if they do listen, I'm sure they'll take a lot from it. Thank you very much.
Cheers, Ryan.